So welcome to the Communal Yoga Podcast, a one-stop shop for all kinds of discussions with some of the most esteemed in their field. We welcome your feedback and appreciate also if you take a moment to review us if you're listening on iTunes. So, also, if you like what you hear, or at least some of it maybe, please consider donating at communalyoga.com and you can find it on the podcast page. But we've no intention of stopping anyway, that's for sure. And today, perhaps one of our highest profile guests is on the show. Bessel van der Kolk. He needs no introduction after most of us have at least heard of or not read his book, The Body Keeps the Score. Great title. Based on his years as a clinical psychologist, the book and his subsequent work present his attempts at incorporating movement therapy in his professional work with those suffering from trauma and its effects. This was due to his observation over many years of working with people with quite unbelievably horrific histories that detailed in the book. And then at a point, talking it over, as well as drug therapies that he offered, he found only made limited headway. So instead, the energy of trauma, literally trapped in the body, needed releasing, he found, in a similarly bodily manner. So hence the title of the book. Of course, we don't go into the book in detail too much on the show, on the podcast. Instead, we talk on how yoga is related as a healing modality in movement. The role of the yoga teacher in this, how to handle those in our class potentially suffering trauma, as well as how to avoid triggering others, while still not abandoning the medium of touch and not treating anyone with kid gloves, yet respecting everyone as an individual potentially holding trauma. So there's so much to this interview, and even though I only had 45 minutes and he told me at the start I only had 30, so I actually probably did pretty well. We also talk on Drishti and its relation to EMDR, which is the movement modality using the eyes, which is quite interesting at the end of the podcast. So an amazing show, and despite the quality of the audio, please persevere with it because it really does say something incredibly lucid and helpful things on this show. So I hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, I'll pass you over to the recording. So welcome, Dr. van der Kolk, to the Communal Yoga Podcast. Thanks for coming on. And I suppose to start, you're not a yoga teacher, as you pointed out in our brief discussion previously. You're clearly not a yoga teacher. You're a psychiatrist, an author of a book that many of our students have read, The Body Keeps the Score, a wonderful book. I've read it twice over at least. And I think it resonates with a lot of students now, particularly it's coming out the idea of yoga not just being something for enlightenment, I suppose, as it was originally framed, when it first came over. And now we're really looking at it as a trauma therapy.
That's not a bad way. Yeah. That's not a bad way of putting it, for enlightenment.
That's not bad. It's not.
It depends on how you feel.
Right, okay. Right. Yeah, that's true enough. And so at what point, I suppose, my entry question would be, at what point did you find that the talking therapies and the drug therapies that you were trained to use as a psychiatrist coming out of university, out of training, didn't work? Or what was the turning point for you?
Well, I thought that it doesn't work. It didn't take care of people losing touch with their bodies. So it became very clear in our research and our clinical observations is that traumatized people shut themselves down. They become literally uptight, bracing themselves. Their autonomic nervous system gets very messed up, and so they start having low heart rate variability, and they start having decreased sensations in their bodies or hypersensations in their body. They become afraid of their own sensations of their bodies. So they need to be helped to feel safe, very gently sort of move into paying attention to yourself. Also because what slowly began to emerge is the only way that we can actually access or influence the core survival part of our brain is through what's known as the midline structure of the cortex, which is the interoceptive network. It's feeling yourself, noticing yourself, meeting yourself on a very deep level. Clearly, that meeting yourself at that level, that sort of like mindfulness became a very core requirement to heal from trauma, actually. It's not optional. So once you become all uptight, you get stuck in a physically uptight and frozen world. It has to be opened up.
Do the two go together? Would you say that the talking and the moving go together, or can you simply is simply the moving enough, or do you need to understand what comes up within the moving?
Well, there's no one answer, and it's very important for nobody to say, "I have the answer." And so, part of healing from trauma is working with your body, accessing your body. Part of dealing with trauma is finding words for what happened to you. Part of dealing with trauma is to develop a sense of self-compassion for what you have gone through. So it's a multi-layered issue, of which yoga can take a small part, and psychotherapy plays a small part. And so we all donate a piece of a larger puzzle.
Is there any way that you would contextualize movement or having seen movement contextualized over years to make it more or less efficient in terms of doing this? Because, you talk in your book about a number of different, you do theatre, there's a physical theatre in one chapter, there's a yoga in another chapter. There's a number of different ways. Now, my experience and what you said at the start was that, yes, there's a fear of one's own feelings in the body, and the context of the yoga mat as a kind of parameter, and the class as a parameter, and certainly this is ostensibly an Ashtanga-based podcast, which is a repetitive form of yoga. It has a sequence, and that sequence as a kind of context, that was very helpful in terms of a holding space, for that movement. If it was a free-flow movement, having come from a lot of trauma myself, I think I would have been overwhelmed and probably run away I wouldn't know how to process the sensations that were coming up.
So I wouldn't know if that's true.
Okay. We haven't got control.
But what I see is all the time is that somebody knows something and say, "Oh, I've found the answer," and that's like, no, it works very well for some people, but never for everybody. I would never, being who I am, not a yoga teacher, I would never say that form of yoga is the best. That's what you have to do. It depends very much on how safe you feel with your yoga instructor, how attuned your yoga instructor. But I wouldn't be able to say one technique being better than any other technique.
No, I suppose that wasn't exactly the way I wanted to phrase the question. It was more like, is there any qualities of the movement modality that make it particularly efficacious for kind of cleansing or kind of working or feeling or reconciling trauma in the body?
I think it's more the interaction with the yoga teacher. It's more the way the yoga teacher moves, the way the yoga teacher uses their voice, the yoga teacher giving people various options. It's very much more a function, to my mind, of how attuned the yoga teacher is than a particular technique. But like with everything else, with trauma, I tend to go for a gentle exploration of oneself.
Right. What about the Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory? How does that relate to your idea of trauma in the body?
Well, Steve actually got into trauma because I invited him to my conference. It's a very helpful theory to explain to some degree how yoga might work. But it's he focuses on a tiny part of the brain, and it's really much more complex than that. And so now, what I see happening is that one little piece, saying, "Oh, we have the answer, so you can train to this." No, the polyvagal theory was one helpful small part component, but I would say what happens to the insula and people, the part of the brain that's very understood what goes on in your body, which is very far removed from where the polyvagal theory takes place, is at least equally important. So is the medial forebrain that allows you to observe yourself. So these are all small parts of a much larger puzzle. But Steve's theory was very helpful in terms of helping us to focus on heart rate variability, helping us to focus on the autonomic nervous system, which is one small part of the whole larger puzzle.
I mean, I think yoga now is being very much corralled into the idea of it as a therapy to arouse the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So to get over that fight or flight response.
Yeah, everybody wants to be a biologist, and so people start throwing down parasympathetic nervous system, but it doesn't quite work that way.
Okay, right.
It grows up the simplification of how the brain works.
Yeah.
But what's troublesome for me is, people start talking neuroscience language. And they go like, more complex than that. It's about circuits in the brain. It's about being able to filter out irrelevant information. It's about being able to notice signals of your body. But it's so many. So, the polyvagal theory, very helpful, but it just explains a tiny, tiny piece of the whole thing.
So how do people approach it if they're looking for, if they feel like they were looking for a modality? I mean, is it just simply, I mean, the biggest piece of information you've given so far is the context of relationship with the teacher within the movement structure.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say relationship. I would say the attunement of the teacher. When I go to my yoga class, I don't have a relationship with the teacher. But the teacher's voice and gestures are very important to help me to tune into myself. And so, for example, at one point I went to a yoga class, particular form of yoga, and I'm doing the movement, and the yoga teacher starts talking about this Dr. Van der Kolk, who explains how the body works in trauma. And I want to yell, shut up and teach yoga.
That's brilliant.
I think we all should do what we know best and read other stuff. Don't. I see it all the time, but don't think that these little theories sort of explain the whole thing. For me, it's all an empirical question. So the hardest thing is for people to actually pay attention to their bodies. And so you go to a yoga studio for people to help you to get a practice of paying attention to your body and noticing how you can shift the sensation in your body by these asanas and these breathing techniques. Same thing when I talk to art therapists or dance therapists is just show what you do and how well you do it. But for God's sake, don't talk about the amygdala and the polyvagal theory, because there's a whole, that makes it, those are pseudo explanations.
And I think also it's easy to shelter behind information, isn't it? Because one wants to make something that, kind of feels certain. And it's easier to kind of feel certain with information than actually go into the uncertainty of the feelings that might arise in your body. Rather than say, well, if I do a forward fold, it's stimulating for my parasympathetic nervous system and it's doing this to the brain and that to the brain. So therefore, I am safe, rather than actually feel what it feels like to forward fold.
Yeah, see, I think we all have a need to feel respected. And so if you don't feel like you get respected as a yoga teacher, you need to say, but it does something to the brain, and let me tell you what it does to the brain. And then you sound more knowledgeable. But my yoga teacher doesn't need to tell me about the brain. Doesn't need to know about the brain, actually. But my yoga teacher needs to be very attuned to how can she help me to actually have a practice of touching my toes, of my having a practice of twisting my spine. That's what a yoga teacher does.
But then if something comes up, what do they do then? I mean, because this is another question I had, particularly for you, is you've all these things that come up when you move the body. And then the yoga teacher is meant to be a repository of these things. I mean, what do they do? What do they do then?
Well, I think the hard thing about being a yoga teacher is that yoga is essentially a non-verbal practice. And so if people do, let's say, a pigeon pose, and they get triggered with a sensation in their pelvis that makes them feel scared and panicky, how well is this yoga teacher able to pick up that this person is stiffening up, and how well is the person able to help people to relax into a pose? You don't need anything. You need to go to fancy brain language, but learning to be very attuned to people without language, that's a big challenge for you. And so what's interesting to me is that my patients go to yoga, and it's very much part of that. The treatment package is to get a yoga practice, and then I hear what poses are triggering for them. And I hear them talk about the happy baby pose, how terrifying it is, and how they start to become really upset. And then I argue with my own yoga teachers who say, well, you should avoid a touch. You should avoid assist.
Right.
Because they can trigger people. Yes, it can. You should avoid assist. It means that you should explore with the person how helpful assists are for them. Like my old colleague who used to work for me at the trauma center says to people, oh, you shouldn't do happy baby pose with rape survivors. And I say, actually, you do need to do happy baby pose, but because you need to own every part of your body. But you have to do it very, very gradually, and to really notice very closely, to encourage people to push themselves to the edge and to come back, and push themselves to the edge and to come back. But no actually prohibition, never touch people. No, touch is important. But for some people, touch initially may be very scary. And so as a yoga teacher, you need to really discuss with people, do you want to assist? Don't you want to assist? And the practice of my patients is very much that the yoga teachers regularly violate agreements about not touching, for example.
Right.
And that's not good.
No, it doesn't sound good. But what if, is it not potentially the argument against it would be, it's too risky. That it's too risky to touch or trigger something too great, and therefore don't do it at all.
That's what people do. But as long as you cannot twist your pelvis, you don't own your body. So, yes, it's challenging. And so, but then to make prohibitions against it means that you cut people off from their bodies. Unless you can say to people, oh, you're too scared to do happy baby pose. Oh, maybe something else can also help you to open up your relationship to your pelvis. Because the job is to own every piece of your body. And so that doesn't mean that you run away from the challenges, but you go and very gently and carefully help people to meet the challenges.
Yeah.
And so I recommend always for any form of therapy, and yoga in the form of therapy, is to make videotapes and to look at your practice with somebody. And so if you have time to speak in your class, look at the videotape with a colleague and with a teacher and say, when we did that pose, the person became uptight. Or when we did that pose, you could see their breathing change. And so just like a therapist, yoga teachers need to be exquisite observers of the body, and the physiological arousal system. And you have to adjust your practice, your teaching, to the physiological level of arousal of the people you work.
Oh, what about as the individual?
And the physiological arousal, knowing about the polyvagal theory, might be helpful. You can just keep in your mind what that arousal is about.
Right, that's what I was going to ask you. So as the individual practicing, what do you do when you get a feeling that, you're uncomfortable with, or, whatever feeling is in the body, right? And do you need to go back to tracing the source of it in a kind of verbal manner, in a language? Or, what do you do when a feeling comes up that's intense? What do you do with it?
You find a way of relaxing. And so you would say, is Shivaasana helpful to you? For many people, Shivaasana is actually quite scary. And because being relaxed and not defended may bring stuff up. They would rather feel busy. So you need to find out when you feel uptight, what is helpful to you? The mountain pose, is it helpful? Or some other pose? Or, what do you call them? Happy.
Yeah.
What do you call it together? But some other pose, and see what makes you feel most comfortable.
So when the feeling's coming up, you can persevere into it as an individual, or you go into a different posture.
You go there, but you go there. You notice it, and you notice that this is a challenge that I need to work on. Don't avoid it. The nature of trauma is you have an experience that is too much for you to handle. And so you become afraid of your own sensations. And if you are a traumatized person and you do yoga, you can be pretty sure that uncomfortable stuff will come up for many people. And so you notice what's uncomfortable, and you help people to find a way of restoring themselves. And then you go, I need to go more there. Because what keeps the trauma going is the avoidance of yourself.
Right.
But I think yoga teachers are potential great healers, but it's also very, very complex to pick up all these signals without any words. Because yoga is a non-verbal practice.
And their healing isn't actually to fix the patient in a kind of verbal manner or a psychoanalysis, which often becomes the case. Is simply observance and acknowledging the person as they are.
Analysis as a treatment for trauma?
Well, the yoga teacher as a therapist.
Completely. Don't go back to analysis if you are traumatized. All these people do is explain why you screwed up. Like, okay, now I know why you screwed up.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But knowing why you screwed up doesn't make you less screwed up. Now I know why I'm screwed up.
That's exactly my experience.
But if you have never been able to tell somebody, my dad beat me up and I'm really scared of big guys, it's very good to say that. Oh, good. I was able to say that. Good. Okay, I get scared of big guys because my father was a violent drug. Okay, that gives me some sort of handle of the next time I meet a big guy to maybe keep my distance or do some breathing or go to a yoga class before I do it so I don't get so uptight. So you have some handle to deal with yourself. But at the end, I would say that being able to get in touch with your body and feeling safe, doing a happy baby pose or doing a pose that has been challenging to you, may be more transformative than telling people how you were abused. Or
at a certain point, I found that it was just, once you acknowledged it and once you've been able to say it, then it's like, well, what do you do then? You have to. It's still in the body. It still feels in the body. And my experience was exactly what you explain in the book. As so many people's, I'm sure. It still feels there, even though I've said it, even though I've acknowledged it. What now? What now? I just keep on saying it over and over again and kind of almost exacerbating it by kind of going into it. more. I don't know.
The great danger, of course, of verbal psychotherapy is that now you explain all kind of bad things about you that you feel ashamed, embarrassed about. Say, oh, that explains who I am, and it becomes an alibi. It becomes an identity. I'm an incest victim. You cannot touch me. Or I'm an incest victim, and hence I cannot do happy baby pose. Instead of saying, I'm an incest survivor, which makes it very hard for me to do happy baby pose and to own my own pelvis. And so I need to learn how to own my pelvis so the incest does not continue to get relived every time I do anything sexual, but I can actually reorganize my system so that my pelvis is mine and doesn't belong to the abuser anymore. But as long as you pull it off, basically you have donated a piece of your body to whoever did something to you. That's where you need to reclaim yourself.
Is it important to have a group context for movement? I mean, I know I kind of like a certain Stephen Porges interview where he talks about kind of the contextualization of oneself in as affirmed in a society, that you have affirmation from.
I didn't know. I didn't know Steve was a yoga practitioner.
No, he's not. He's not. There's more like the idea that you have to have positive signals. The idea that you have the positive signals from the outside, reaffirming your own state. And within within moving your body, is it okay to do it on your own? Or, I mean, a number of the examples you use in the book very much focus on engagement within a context, right?
Yeah, no, I know people who have private yoga classes. Certainly with COVID, a lot of people are practicing from a tape or something. But for me personally, the group experience of, I'm a stiff white guy, of being in a class where there's other stiff white guys and very limber young people and a variety of people is very, very encouraging in a way, because, we're all creatures who try to do the same thing. And I find the communal part of yoga actually very rich. Also because when you're traumatized, you become a very isolated person because you are always afraid of getting hurt when you're upset or freezing. And so being with other people and going through these challenging experiences can be very, very enjoyable. To see, they can do it. Maybe someday I can do this too. Oh boy, it's beautiful to see this person do it. And you activate your mirror neuron system. And so when I go to a yoga class and the person next to me is some limber person who can do things, it almost feels like I can do it too. It's like watching Michael Jordan play basketball. You see him jump. You vicariously jump also. So everybody feels more athletic after seeing Michael Jordan, even though you may be absolutely unable to jump more than 1 inch from the floor.
Yeah. It seems like you're handling
the mirror.
Yeah. Your handling of it is your handling of the whole subject is quite, let's say, open. And what's coming more and more into yoga is very much kid gloves, right? Like we've got consent cards in some places where you put on the floor, like not to touch or this or that, right? So you've got, all this language now of being triggered. You can't trigger me. You can't use this language. It might trigger me. Thoughts on that?
See, I'm unreconstructed. I was born in 1943, so what can you expect from me? I'm completely out of touch with the culture. But no, life is filled with triggers. And you come for treatment in order to deal with triggers. And so saying, you cannot do that, you cannot do that, you cannot do that. I'm sorry that you have a hard time with all these things. How can we help you to tolerate that, rather than make a sterile environment where you never feel scared? Where are you going to live? We live in Texas. Life sucks a good amount of the time, except in Australia. So you cannot You cannot avoid feeling bad. You cannot avoid feeling scared. The question is, how do you deal with being scared? How do you deal with feeling uptight? And what can you do for yourself to make yourself more robust or capable? But don't say to other people, you can never do that to me, because I get upset. I have to go to work. It's really upsetting that I have to get out of bed in the morning, actually. Off and off.
Is there any do you think the language is important? I mean, you mentioned language of the yoga teacher before. Ought one to be very careful with language then? Yes. And can you give any examples of better or worse language to frame it, stuff in, instructions, cues?
See, again, I don't know enough about yoga.
You've been to some classes, evidently.
No, my great teacher or yoga example is Stephen Kolk.
Oh yeah, I've just interviewed him recently. Yeah. Yes, I did. Yes. Great guy.
He doesn't respond to me, but I haven't talked to him since the pandemic started.
He's well. He's finishing his book. Another book. Yeah.
Another book. He's very prolific. Yeah. So I take my cues from Stephen Kolk. Because he just gets trauma, and he gets how difficult it is, and he can talk about the drama of the unwanted child. He gets and how people get triggered in yoga class, and how hard it may be. Sometimes it's really hard. But want to recover from trauma, it's hard. There's no easy shortcuts. But so what you want is a yoga teacher who is not judgmental. That's very important to not be judgmental. Say, do what you can. My very first yoga teacher was not spectacular, but I liked about her, she'd always give us 3 options.
Yeah, I think that's...
Now, if you're just beginning to do that, you're hopelessly tired, you may want to do that. And if you want to challenge yourself a little bit more, and if you really feel limber, you can do that. And I thought that was lovely. I say, you didn't feel humiliated if you did only, like if you can't touch your toe, just touch your calf. Just touch your knee. See what you can do, but no saying, oh, it's not good enough, because every explanation is good. And so the issue of being really supportive of people exploring things and giving people space to recover and to gather their courage is very important, but not, we won't ever do this because you're a traumatized person. That means that we accept your identity and that you're permanently damaged. And I don't think that's a good message. The message is, you survived this fight. My main thing that keeps me to do this work is the incredible courage that people have to go on with their lives despite the fact that they have seen the most horrendous stuff. And so trauma survivors are among the most amazing people in the world because they have survived something that the rest of us couldn't even imagine surviving. And so, with respect, but not with kids' gloves. But you don't push people. My saying throughout my book is the saying by W.H. Auden, truth like love and sleep resents approaches that are too intense. And so you don't go to a fast, sweaty yoga class if you're just beginning to discover how your body works. And so gentle yoga is important, but the goal is to own your body, every part of your body.
Can you get overstimulated by movement? And then, is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
You can, no. If you do too much, you start feeling like you're getting raped again. And so, indeed, being very careful not to push people too hard is terribly important. And triggering is not good. But who should be the judge of the trigger at the end? It's going to be you. And your yoga teacher cannot determine that for you. They can ask, what's that like for you? Or to register as a yoga teacher, boy, that person stopped and sat all the way in the back of the class, and she seemed to lie on her mat and not do this. How can I help this person to encourage her to do a little bit more action? But at the end, people themselves have to determine what their triggers are.
What happens if you
and learn to manage?
What happens if you're the teacher, though, on the other end of it, and you see someone visibly in a state of re-traumatization? You're in a group class setting. What do you do?
I would say something about be sure to take a break from time to time. It's perfectly all right not to participate in every asana. It's okay to notice that your body is not ready to do this. And so see how far you can do it and stop before you get too upset. But see what you can tolerate. But that's what good yoga teachers do anyway, don't they?
Yeah, one would hope so. I think the group's class setting is kind of sometimes difficult because I've had situations where there's many people in the class and then there's one person who you can see is going through something and you can't stop the class. You're leading it from the front. And you'd like to take a moment with the person, and maybe you don't know what to do at the time, and also maybe you'd like to speak to them at the end, maybe, but you also feel that maybe that's overstepping the mark, or So yeah, there's a lot of confusion still for me as to how best to approach. Yeah,
I think if you see somebody freak out, be sure to give the class options about what to do, and while people are busy with their pose, I might walk over to that person and say, "Are you okay? Would you like an assist? Would you like me to hold you back while you try this pose? Or would you like to just take a rest here?" Have a little conversation with that person that you acknowledge how hard it is, but also encourage them and honor them for still being in class. Because the danger, of course, is that if they get triggered in the class and there's no support, they'll never come back. And to my mind, for a traumatized person to lose any hope of ever reclaiming their bodies is basically death sentence. So really encouraging people to stay with the class or to find a class that's really most helpful for them. You may even think about who among your colleagues would be doing a gentler form of yoga than you do, or might be more flexible than you are in your practice. Look around if there might be some other people who might be able to do better than you are. But yoga is not about storytelling. It's about having a body that needs to be helped to organize. And so to my mind, your job is to notice when somebody becomes too uptight and to see whether your personal attention to it, your kind voice and your nice face, that can help a person to feel safe in the classroom, even though it can be difficult. And to say, these particular asanas may be very hard for some people. And that's okay. And so if you want to sit it out, sit it out. But they need to be masters of what triggers it, and they need to have permission for you to nurture themselves, to take care of themselves.
I mean, it strikes me what you're saying is actually just ultimate simplicity of a direct and caring relationship with another individual, really, which has got no obvious instructions or qualifications around it. Is there more to it than that, or is it just simply being with it like a kind of radical being with someone else and noticing them?
It's not a relationship, like when you're a kindergarten teacher with a bunch of out of control 3 and 4-year-olds. Your job is to be a good teacher to a 4-year-old. It's not like to have a relationship with these kids. I mean, you'll have a relationship, but you're the teacher and they're the students. And so you don't share your own personal life with them. And as a teacher, you do whatever you can to help that person have a good yoga class. But that's not the same as a relationship. Aside from Stephen Kolk, I have very few relationships in the yoga world, actually. I've got in many classes.
But you did pick
I
up.
find not to be known by them.
I bet you have. Maybe they know you though. But I bet you picked Stephen though because you did feel a relationship with him. So there must be something in that. No. All right.
I picked Stephen because
he was just close to where you're living.
Because he's smart as hell.
He's quite smart. Yeah.
He's smart as hell,
yeah.
and could really explain to me what yoga does for people. But the way he writes about yoga really gave me a much deeper understanding about yoga than anything else that I've read.
Okay, well.
And we hang out at the same institution. I teach at Kapala, where he was a guru for a long time. Also.
Yes, he's still there. Maybe last question then. You talk about the EDMR and the how effective that can be. Now, in yoga, they've got they're telling you to look at certain places, right? They've got called drishti, the use of the eyes. Would that be, is that related at all to this modality, the EDMR?
That's a very interesting question. I don't know eye practice in yoga, so I've not come across.
Yeah, there are. Yeah.
But I've always wondered. EMDR is a very simple technique, and I've wondered, why did it take people 5,000 years to discover the movie Eyes Are Out?
No, it's in yoga.
I bet other people have discovered.
Yeah, it's called drishti, gazing points. Yeah.
Well, see, that doesn't surprise me at all. Because
you never heard that before. There you go.
No, I haven't heard that, but it feels to traumatized people. We are a fucked up species, Like everywhere, people do nasty things to each other, and so every culture has developed ways of helping people deal with trauma. And to my mind, maybe yoga to a large degree was developed in India in order to help people with trauma. And in China, they developed qigong, similar, somewhat different practice. In Africa, they have drumming practices. And so every culture finds stuff that's worthwhile paying attention to. And so yoga happens to be one very good trauma treatment, actually. But in India, people don't talk about their inner reality. When you go sit down with somebody and tell them, oh, when I was 3 years old, I was raped by my dad or something. That's not part of the Indian tradition. It's truth-telling in that regard. And so that's what people in Northern Europe are good at. But people in Northern Europe did not discover how to work with the body. So people in India were good at that.
Do you think that yoga was instigated as a trauma methodology?
I would guess that's probably true.
Right.
If you're very happy, you're comfortable and getting along with other people, you don't feel. You probably don't go to a yoga studio. I mean, I've always got to yoga because I had to, not because it was.
Don't you think the
luxury,
an inherent wish of the species is transcendence? That we also want to transcend the condition where people are doing nasty things to each other all the time, and idealism, right? It's from Plato onwards. You've got this wish for the ideal. So, maybe that's there as well.
The bottom line is really value what you do. You don't have to know about brain scans and yoga. I mean, I really enjoyed doing the research I wanted to show how effective yoga was. And so we published 3 scientific articles on yoga. This wasn't much fun. Getting money to do a randomized controlled yoga study. You have to be a little crazy to not do a study like that. But I'm very proud that we did it, and that we put yoga on the map for trauma treatment and say, good, we did something. Yeah.
All right. Well, I know you're a busy man. What about just give me? I always wrap it up. just to give the audience a little bit more information about you, can you give me one inspiration, something that inspires you, a person or something, a place or a book, and one guilty pleasure?
A guilty pleasure. One of my guilty pleasures actually is coming to Australia. I love coming. I've been there every year until the pandemic.
To Australia?
25 years. Oh, yeah. To Australia all the time. Yeah.
What do you like about it?
You should go.
I would love to go. It's really
fun. Good books. Like, good books about yoga is Stephen Kolk is great. Another person who's great to read is Eve Ensler, the person who wrote the Vagina Monologues, who has written beautiful books about trauma. Who else? I think Stephen Levine's books are very useful to understand about the body and yoga.
Peter Levine?
Body experience.
The Taming the Tiger. Yeah, he's good. Yeah. And of course, your book. Yeah.
Not my book, but I don't need to advertise it anymore because everybody's reading it.
Yeah, they've already. Yeah. You wrote a bestseller there. Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody who new is going to read it because so many people have read it.
Well, look, to be fair, you hit upon a good title, didn't you? It's a bloody good title. The title of the book is pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah.
I would think that the title is half the battle, but writing this 464 pages.
Yeah, the writing's all right. The writing's all right, but the title. No, the writing's good.
Anyway, have fun, enjoy yourself. Yoga is a very important thing, and I'm delighted that our culture has more and more room for yoga, and it's less and less stigmatized. And I think you're doing very important things for all of us. So keep doing it.
Thank you, Van der Kolk, Doctor. And wonderful to have you. All right. Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.